Hello everybody. Today we are going to continue working on our Michigan stamp design. So I have my example here that we've been working on throughout class. So as a reminder, I have on my stamp design my image, which is a robin, the state bird of Michigan. I have a title, the word robin, done in block letters. The country that the stamp is issued. Okay, that's the United States of America. And the price of the stamp, in my case, I just put forever for a forever stamp. So we're going to talk a little bit about what to do next. I've made sure to outline him or all my pencil lines in ultra fine Sharpie, and used a pink eraser to erase my extra pencil lines that I don't need anymore. So before we get to the watercoloring, I wanted to show you some examples, okay, so that we can think about this a little bit before we get started. Because as you know, and I'm going to show you an example of this later, when you paint watercolor next to watercolor, it blends together. And if you want a nice clean edge, you cannot paint the whole picture in the same class period. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I'm going to move this off to the side a little bit and show you this. Okay, this is an example that I made. And these are options that you can use for your lettering and for other parts of your stamp. So my first section at the top, I have used crayon, right? I've used a lighter color crayon, and as you know, because crayons are made out of wax, they resist water. So if I decide to paint my sky, right up there on the top, I can paint right over those letters. Look at that. Okay, and I don't have to worry about painting around them, because I'm sure, as we all know, painting around letters is a big old bummer. Not to mention the fact that most of us aren't careful enough with our painting to keep our paint from going into the letters. All right, so that's one option that you have on your stamp. You can color some of the areas in with crayon ahead of time, and that won't keep it looking rather neat. Another option for you is to pre-color some of your areas with permanent marker. Right, the permanent marker, because it is permanent, is unaffected by the water in the watercolor. If you use a color that is slightly darker than the watercolor that you are planning to paint with, if it's lighter, I can't promise you what it'll look like, because the colors will blend together. So for instance, if you had used a yellow marker, it may have come out looking green. I didn't actually try that out. So this is an option for you as well. In some areas, you could color it in with a permanent marker and then do your wash on top. Now this area, I have already done a wash on these two bottom areas. They've already been washed and dried thoroughly. Okay, I know that sometimes this watercolor paper feels like it's dry. I promise you it is not. If you painted on it during this class period, this watercolor paper is not going to be dry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my watercolor brush, and I am going to, again, you have to be pretty neat and tidy for this. I'm going to come in here and paint over. See, it's already kind of going out of the lines. But if I'm careful, I can paint right on top of it. Like so. Oh, honestly, see what happens? I've got to take my time. My brush is a little wanting. Here we go. All right, so that is another option. All right. The third option would be to do your wash first, wait for it to dry completely, and then use a permanent marker over. You get a very similar look to the second option up top. Right? So I do want you thinking ahead as to how you want to plan your lettering and some of the other areas of your stamp that may be difficult to do with watercolor. Okay, so on this stamp, or my example I should say, what I have done is I've gone ahead, there were some areas of my robin that had white. You know, there was some white around the eye, some white areas on the robin, and so I just went ahead and used a white crayon and kind of marked those areas. So when you are choosing to do, like I have another example right here, when you are choosing which areas you're going to paint first, I often suggest that you do the background first. I know you always want to go for the positive space, the theme of your artwork, but sometimes it's helpful to do the background first. What you do need to remember, though, is that you cannot paint something that is next to something else. So for instance, in this example, I would either do the background on one class period day, and on another period I would do the bird and the rock, okay, or vice versa. But what I was going to show you was this. All right, if you're going to do the background, if you're going to do a large area, something that can be helpful, and you may or may not be able to see this very well. I'm going to do, you know, kind of be as detailed as I can here, but if you, using just plain water, pre-dampen the area that you want to color. So if we're going to do a sky, and I want to pre-dampen all the sky areas, I'm not coloring over any of my bird, at least I'm trying not to, right, or my rock. When the watercolor is put onto the watercolor paper, it will flow into the areas that are wet, and it will not flow into the areas that are dry. So if I have some areas that are wet on my paper, right, now what I will do is I'm going to pull some blue watercolor, and I'm just going to kind of lay this down a little bit. It's going to start, see what it's doing right there? It's kind of starting to blend around, and I can just dip my paintbrush in the water and kind of spread this blue around. It keeps it from creating those edges that you get sometimes. When you're working on large areas like the sky. Right. I'm just going to put a little blue in here. A little blue in there. Now, because it's still wet, so you have kind of a nice sky there. If I would like to, I could even add in some areas just a little extra color, maybe a little purple. I could put up here in the corner, and it will also kind of blend and bleed out into the sky. It makes it a little more interesting, so it's not all just one flat color. Now, just quickly, however, I would like to show you what's going to happen here when I start trying to paint it all on the same day. Okay, so I'm going to take this part and I'm going to go ahead and paint this right up to that edge. Okay. Paint that up to that edge right there, and then I'm going to take some black and I'm going to put this right here, right around his head. These must be the most awesome watercolors ever, because normally at this point they would be spreading like crazy. I'll give them a little time too, because I think it's going to leak out a little bit into the sky. All right, and as you remember, I'm sure, that in order to make things that are lighter when you're using watercolors, we just what? Add more water. All right, so here's kind of where, this is where I'm talking about, where I've just painted the leg, and now I've painted this rock, and now the yellow from the leg is kind of leaking out into the rock. All right, so this is what I'm kind of talking about right here. Now, what I'd like to do is just briefly show you an example over here where I have used the crayon, okay, to mark some areas. So when we come in here, there we go, right around the eye. So there are a couple areas in here that are not going to, there we go, right there. Okay, so we can get a little bit of texture right by using that crayon. There's a little bit of white down here. Okay, and then now I feel like I can use the red next to this black because it does kind of blend on the robin. And there was a little bit of crayon on his chest area there. I did it very lightly. I'm not sure if that will show. All right. So there is my robin. I'm going to wait to do his beak and his eyeball for another day. And then I can do the rock. And then I could, if I want to, I guess I could work on the letters on the top in preparation for the painting. Looks like I put some white on the rock as well. All right, so that's how we're going to start. All right, let's get started.